Have you ever woken up with a strange feeling, like something isn't quite right, but you ignore it? That quiet signal, that whisper in your mind, that uneasy tension in your chest. What if I told you that ignoring that warning sign could cost you more than just a bad day? Because this isn't really about witches, it's about awareness, it's about intuition, and most importantly, it's about the warning signs we choose to ignore every single day. There is something quietly powerful about the very first feeling you experience when you wake up. Something so subtle that most people overlook it without a second thought. Yet, it often carries more truth than the loudest thoughts that come later in the day. Before your phone lights up, before conversations begin, before the world places its expectations on you, there is a brief moment where your mind speaks in its most honest form. It might come as a sense of calm, a strange discomfort, a hesitation about something you plan to do, or even an unexplained tension that lingers without a clear reason. What makes this moment fascinating is that it is untouched by outside influence. It is raw, unfiltered, and deeply connected to your subconscious. Many people dismiss it because it doesn't come with clear words or logical explanations. But that is exactly what gives it its power. It is not trying to argue with you or convince you, it is simply presenting a signal. The curiosity lies in asking why the signal appears at all, why certain mornings feel heavier than others, or why sometimes you feel resistance towards something that seemed perfectly fine the night before. If you begin to pay attention, patterns start to emerge, almost like your mind is leaving clues for you to decode. That slight uneasiness before meeting someone, that lack of excitement about an opportunity you once wanted, that quiet push to pause instead of rushing forward. These are not random fluctuations of mood, but reflections of deeper processing happening beneath your awareness. It is as if your brain has already analyzed situations, people, and possibilities while you were asleep, and what you feel in the morning is the conclusion it reached without needing to explain every step. Ignoring it may seem harmless in the moment, especially when logic steps in to override it. But the more you push it aside, the more you distance yourself from a part of your perception that is designed to protect and guide you. There is something almost mysterious about how accurate these first feelings can be when you look back at them later, like realizing you knew something all along but chose not to trust it. That realization alone raises questions about how many decisions are influenced not by lack of knowledge, but by the choice to ignore what is already known on a deeper level. And it invites you to wonder what might change if, instead of dismissing that first feeling, you pause just long enough to explore it, to sit with it, to question it, and to see where it leads before the noise of the day takes over and buries it completely. What makes these signals even more intriguing is how quietly they appear, never forcing themselves into your attention yet, consistently present in moments where something matters, almost like a background system running checks without announcing its process. They rarely come as dramatic warnings or clear instructions, which is perhaps why they are so easy to ignore. but their subtlety does not make them insignificant. A slight hesitation before saying yes, a feeling of discomfort in an otherwise normal situation, or sense that something is just slightly out of place can be easy to brush off. Can be easy to brush off, especially when everything on the surface looks fine. Yet, these small signals often carry layers of meaning that only become clear with time, and that delay in understanding is what makes them so fascinating. You might wonder why your mind chooses to communicate in this indirect way, why it doesn't simply present a clear thought instead of a vague feeling. And the answer may lie in how much information it processes beyond your conscious awareness. Your brain is constantly picking up details, tone of voice, body language, past experiences, patterns you've seen before, and combining them into impressions that are too complex to translate instantly into words. What you feel as a simple discomfort could actually be the result of hundreds of tiny observations aligning in a way that signals caution. The curiosity deepens when you start noticing how often these subtle signs prove to be accurate in hindsight, how moments that felt off often reveal reasons later that you couldn't see at the time. It creates a sense that there is an internal intelligence at work, one that doesn't rely on immediate explanation, but still guides you in quiet ways. The real question then becomes not whether these signals matter, but why they are so consistently overlooked. Perhaps it is because they challenge the idea that everything must be logical and clearly understood before it is taken seriously, or because trusting something you cannot fully explain feels uncomfortable. Yet there is something compelling about the idea that your awareness operates on levels you don't fully access, and that these small signs are glimpses into that deeper layer. Once you begin to notice them, you start to see them everywhere, in decisions you make, in interactions you have, in opportunities you consider, and each one carries a quiet invitation to look closer, to question more, and to wonder what else might be hidden in the signals you have yet to fully understand. There is a quiet shift that happens over time, so gradual that most people never notice it, where the voice inside them becomes softer, while the noise of the outside world grows louder, and eventually, without realizing it, they begin to trust everything except themselves. From a young age, people are taught to rely on logic, to follow instructions, to seek validation from others, and to prioritize what is considered reasonable over what is felt internally. At first, this seems practical, even necessary, but somewhere along the way, it creates a subtle disconnect. You start questioning your instincts, second guessing your feelings, and looking outward for confirmation before making even the simplest decisions. The curiosity here lies in how natural Thai process feels, even though it slowly rewires the way you think. You might ignore a gut feeling because it doesn't sound logical, or dismiss a sense of discomfort because there is no clear evidence to justify it. And in doing so, you begin to silence a part of your awareness that once operated freely. What makes this even more fascinating is that the more you ignore it, the easier it becomes to keep ignoring it, as if your mind adapts to being unheard. Over time, this creates a pattern where external opinions carry more weight than internal signals, and decisions are made based on what seems acceptable rather than what feels right. Yet, every now and then there is a moment where that quiet voice pushes through, creating a sense of conflict between what you think you should do and what you feel you shouldn't do. That tension is often brushed aside, labeled as overthinking or unnecessary doubt, but it raises an interesting question about how much of your decision making is truly yours and how much of it is shaped by conditioning. The idea that you might have been trained to overlook your own awareness is both unsettling and intriguing, especially when you start to consider how different things might feel if that inner voice had never been muted in the first place, and whether the clarity you seek externally has been within you all along, waiting for you to trust it again. When these internal signals are ignored repeatedly, the consequences rarely appear all at once, which is perhaps why they are so easy to underestimate. But instead, they accumulate slowly, shaping outcomes in ways that only become obvious in hindsight. A small hesitation dismissed today can turn into a larger regret tomorrow, and a pattern begins to form where choices that once felt slightly off lead to situations that feel significantly wrong. What makes this process so compelling is how subtle the beginning always is, how harmless it seems to ignore a feeling or override a moment of doubt, especially when there is no immediate consequence. Yet over time, these moments build on each other, creating a chain of decisions that drift further away from what might have been a more aligned path. You might find yourself in situations where you wonder how you got there, why something doesn't feel right, or why a decision that made sense at the time now feels like a mistake. And if you trace it back, there is often a moment where a quiet signal was present but overlooked. The curiosity deepens when you realize how consistent this pattern can be, how often the signs were there but dismissed because they didn't seem urgent or important enough to act on. It raises the question of how many outcomes are shaped not by lack of opportunity or ability, but by the repeated choice to ignore subtle warnings that seemed insignificant at the time. There is also something intriguing about how these consequences are not always dramatic failures, but can appear as lingering dissatisfaction, a sense of being in the wrong place, or a feeling that something is missing without knowing exactly what it is. This makes it even harder to connect the outcome to the original moment of hesitation, creating a gap between cause and effect that keeps the pattern going. The more you reflect on this, the more you begin to see how powerful those small signals actually are, not because they demand attention, but because they quietly influence the direction of your life when ignored, leaving behind traces that only make sense when you start to look at them closely and question what might have changed if those signals had been taken seriously in the first place. There is something deeply intriguing about the idea that protection does not always come from something external, something visible, or something powerful, all in the traditional sense, but instead exists quietly within your own awareness, operating in ways that often go unnoticed until you begin to pay attention. Most people search for safety in advice, in systems, in other people's opinions, believing that the more information they gather from outside, the more secure their decisions will be. Yet there is a layer of perception within you that processes far more than you consciously realize. It observes patterns, remembers past outcomes, senses inconsistencies, and forms impressions long before your logical mind catches up. And what makes this fascinating is how effortlessly it works without demanding recognition. That slight feeling of caution when something doesn't align, that subtle resistance when a situation appears perfect on the surface, or that quiet sense of clarity when something feels right without explanation. These are not random reactions, but signals generated by a deeper awareness that is constantly evaluating your environment. The curiosity begins when you consider how often this awareness has been accurate in ways you only understood later, how moments that felt uncertain revealed hidden truths over time, and how many times clarity arrived too late simply because the initial signal was ignored. There is something almost paradoxical about the fact that the more you rely on external validation, the weaker this internal system becomes, as if it adapts to being replaced. Yet, the moment you start paying attention again, it sharpens, becoming more noticeable, more precise, and more consistent. This raises an interesting question about whether true confidence comes from knowing everything or from trusting the part of you that already senses enough. The idea that your greatest form of protection is not something you acquire, but something you recollect with adds another layer of depth because it suggests that what you are looking for has never really been missing, only overlooked, and that by simply observing your own reactions more closely, you begin to access a form of guidance that doesn't need constant explanation to be effective. What becomes even more compelling is the shift that occurs when you stop seeing these signals as warnings to fear and begin to view them as tools to explore. Because the moment you become curious about them instead of dismissive, they start to reveal patterns that were always there but rarely acknowledged. That uneasy feeling is no longer something to push away, but something to examine, something that invites a question rather than a reaction. And in that question lies the possibility of understanding something deeper about your situation, your choices, and even yourself. Instead of immediately acting or ignoring, there is a pause, a space where you allow the feeling to exist long enough to observe it. And that pause alone can change the direction of what happens next. It is interesting how this simple act of paying attention can transform uncertainty into insight, as if the signal itself contains layers that only become visible when you give them time. You might begin to notice that certain feelings repeat in similar situations, that certain environments trigger specific reactions, or that your instincts become clearer when you are not rushing to silence them. And this creates a sense of connection between your experiences. that was previously hidden. The curiosity deepens when you realize that this process is not about becoming overly cautious or hesitant, but about becoming more aware, more intentional, and more aligned with the choices you make. There is also something fascinating about how this shift does not require dramatic change, but rather a subtle adjustment in attention, a willingness to listen without immediately needing to understand, send everything, and to trust that clarity can emerge from observation rather than force. As you continue to explore this, you may start to see how these signals are not interruptions but guidance, not obstacles but indicators, and that by working with them instead of against them, you begin to move through decisions with a different kind of confidence, which the one that is not based on certainty alone, but on a deeper sense of awareness that continues to unfold the more you engage with it the next time you wake up and feel that quiet signal, the what? To hesitation, the uneasiness, or even that calm certainty. Don't rush past it like it's nothing, because what feels small in that moment often carries more weight than you realize. And the difference between those who stay stuck and those who move forward is not luck or timing, but awareness. There is something powerful about simply pausing, about choosing to notice instead of ignore, because in that pause, you create space to understand what your mind has already been trying to show you. The signs were never the problem, the silence around them was. And once you begin to listen, even slightly, you start to see patterns, avoid mistakes, and make choices that feel more aligned with who you are. It's not about being perfect or always getting it right, but about no longer pretending that those signals don't exist, because the more you acknowledge them, the clearer they become. And the clearer they become, the stronger your sense of direction gets, until one day you realize that what once felt like confusion has turned into quiet confidence, simply because you chose to pay attention. And if this made you think differently, even for a moment, then don't stop here. Take that awareness further, explore it, question it, and most importantly, stay connected to it, because the more you engage with these ideas, the sharper they become. So make sure you stay tuned, keep learning, and if you're listening to this somewhere like a platform or channel, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next.